Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, esteemed Indigenous leaders, colleagues, and friends, it is an honor to stand before you today to discuss the vital role of Indigenous peoples in our global pursuit of environmental sustainability. The relationship between Indigenous communities and the planet is deeply rooted in centuries of wisdom, resilience, and harmony. As we navigate the complex landscape of climate change and biodiversity loss, the voices and contributions of Indigenous peoples have become increasingly crucial and essential. Indigenous communities representing diverse cultures and ecosystems worldwide have long served as stewards of the land. Their traditional knowledge, passed down through generations, is an invaluable source of insight into living and sustainable living and coexistence with nature. Today, we're faced with a pressing need to recognize, celebrate, and leverage this wisdom for the benefit of our planet. As the Holy Father Pope Francis reminded us in his encyclical letter Laudato Si, and I quote, "Our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us," end quote. For years and years now, we humans have clearly made irresponsible use of Mother Earth's resources. We're polluting and destroying our land, air, seas, and fresh water, and in such way, we're threatening current and future generations. If we look at some figures, oceans produce over 50% of the world's oxygen. Forests provide habitat for 80% of terrestrial biodiversity and absorb 2.6 billion tons of CO2 annually, substantially helping regulate the climate. Forests also provide drinking water to approximately 1.6 billion people who depend on it. Soils for small-scale agriculture guarantee livelihoods of over 2 billion people. In other words, we won't have breathable air, drinkable water, food, or a livable climate without a healthy Earth. Nature, with its diverse ecosystems and services, serves as a foundational support system, an indispensable safety net for life on Earth. We've been ignoring that nature is interconnected, intertwined, and indivisible with human life, our societies, and economies. Recognizing and preserving nature as our safety net is essential for the well-being of humanity and the sustainability of the planet. In the Laudato Si, the Holy Father stated, and I quote, "We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of our elements. We breathe our air and we receive life and refreshment from her waters," end quote. Indigenous peoples appear to be some of the few humans on Earth who haven't forgotten this. On the global stage, Indigenous peoples play a pivotal role in the climate and biodiversity agenda. Despite constituting only 6.2% of the global population, they safeguard an astonishing 80% of Earth's biodiversity. This statistic alone emphasizes the significance of their custodianship in preserving our planet's ecological diversity. Yet, with this vital role comes immense challenges. Indigenous communities often find themselves disproportionately affected by climate change and environmental degradation, compounded by historical injustices. Moreover, direct access to international funding continues being inequitable and inflexible, with just a 0.0% of total annual climate finance reaching Indigenous peoples directly for tenure rights and forest guardianship, as an example. It is our collective responsibility to address these challenges and ensure that Indigenous peoples are not only protected, but validated as leaders in sustainable development. As His Holy Father stated himself in one of his speeches to further spread the word, the values of the encyclical Laudato Si, and referencing the concept of integral ecology, and I quote, "The neglect of creation and social injustices influence each other. There is no ecology without equality, and there is no equality without ecology," end quote. With those words, the Holy Father so beautifully encapsulated the moral argument that underscores the intrinsic connection and codependence between environmental sustainability and social justice, particularly in the context of protecting Indigenous peoples who often face displacement, loss of land, and who are disproportionately affected by environmental pollution. Recognizing and addressing these environmental injustices is crucial for achieving both ecological sustainability and social equality. It is also relevant to note that Indigenous peoples often maintain unique cultural and spiritual connections to their ancestral lands. Their traditional ecological knowledge is deeply intertwined with sustainable practices that have preserved biodiversity for generations. Therefore, protecting Indigenous peoples' rights to their land is not only a moral imperative per se or an issue of social justice, but it is also a means of preserving valuable ecological knowledge. Talking about cultural ecology, His Holy Father stated in the Laudato Si, and I quote, "Together with the patrimony of nature, there is also an historic, artistic, and cultural patrimony, which is likewise under threat. Many intensive forms of environmental exploitation and degradation not only exhaust the resources which provide local communities with a livelihood, but also undo the social structures which for a long time shaped cultural identity and their sense of the meaning of life and community. In this sense, it is essential to show special care for Indigenous communities and their cultural traditions. They're not merely one minority among others, but should be the principal dialogue partners, especially when large projects affecting the land are proposed. When they remain on the land, themselves care for it best," end quote. At the United Nations Development Programme, we recognize the deep cultural value and sacred meaning of the land to Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that for them, it is not just a commodity, but rather a gift from their ancestors that marks their identity and values. On the lands that they've been masterfully stewarding for millennia is where they daily apply their traditional knowledge by putting into practice their nature-based solutions. The UNDP Equator Initiative during the past 22 years, with a growing network of 286 Indigenous and local communities across all regions, has been recognizing the essential role of Indigenous peoples and the relevance of the nature-based solutions they spearhead for the biodiversity and climate agenda. We at UNDP advocate for embracing Indigenous peoples' knowledge, respecting their rights, and providing equitable support to collectively work towards a more sustainable, resilient, and harmonious world, leaving no one behind. The preservation of biodiversity, the mitigation of climate change, and the pursuit of environmental justice all hinge upon the inclusion and the strengthening of Indigenous peoples and their roles in our shared global agenda. In the face of adversity, Indigenous communities offer inspiring solutions rooted in traditional knowledge. Within the network of Indigenous communities that the UNDP Equator Initiative supports, we have countless examples of their solutions. Many Indigenous communities adopt innovative agricultural and agroforestry practices that enhance biodiversity. Many other communities are championing holistic land management approaches that successfully mitigate climate impact. As an example, we support 21 Indigenous communities in Colombia who established their collective territory as a national park, which was the first national park in Colombia to implement an environmental management regime based on holistic Indigenous knowledge systems for land management. This is a unique example where the communities use their ancestral knowledge in the running of the park, which includes 18 different ecosystems, taking from their rich tradition of shamanism, which is a form of spirituality that blended with their deep understanding of the tropical forest has allowed them to best identify and care for many natural places held to be sacred due to their fundamental role in preserving the area's ecological balance. Some other Indigenous communities are experts in traditional seed savings that highly contribute to food security and resilience. As an example, we've been working with over 5,000 tribal Dalit women in India who developed climate-smart agricultural practices and adopted millet-based agrobiodiverse farming approaches to secure community nutrition, health, and livelihoods in their communities. This has not only allowed them to reclaim their farmlands, but also to fight against chronic malnutrition and poverty in the region. Some Indigenous communities are also experts in sustainable harvesting of medicinal plants for community health. As an example, the UNDP Equator Initiative we've been working with an association of indigenous women in Costa Rica, Salamanca region, who promote the use of traditional practices and knowledge for food security and medicinal purposes. This association works to reconnect community members to the Quebecer traditional food production categories, one of whom is Huito, a space surrounding the house for medicinal plants, herbs, and essential vegetables for cooking, which is also a child's first cultural and ecological education center. These are just a few examples that demonstrate how Indigenous peoples' wisdom is a beacon of hope for a sustainable future. As we forge ahead, we must actively engage with and learn from Indigenous peoples, recognizing their resilience and adaptability, and acknowledging that what we call traditional knowledge equals in importance to modern science. And we shall therefore strive to integrate the two and consider them on equal terms. Today, let us commit ourselves once again to fostering genuine, equal partnerships with Indigenous peoples and strive for living in harmony with nature, recognizing the interconnectedness and interdependence of all beings on Mother Earth. There can be no sustainable development without nature and no healthy nature without Indigenous people stewardship. To conclude, in the spirit of inclusivity and acknowledging that I am not Indigenous myself, I would like to virtually share the stage by presenting a short video featuring some Indigenous youth and leaders who, in their own words, will convey some important messages. Thank you.
I am sitting in a forest. I feel the breeze on my face. I hear the sound of a passing stream. The forest is speaking. The earth is speaking. She is telling us that we have no more time. Where the forest is protected, our peace is protected, our future is protected. The future of humanity tomorrow is tied to the fate of the forest today. Forests provide half of our oxygen. They provide rain for farms a continent away. They are a first protection from the impact of climate change.
The vision of our elders has been to protect the land.
But this precious land is in danger from illegal mining and logging. And the people who try to defend the land are killed in great numbers every year.
Kwangu haki ya ardhi ina muhimu sana kwa sababu haki ya ardhi, upatikanaji ipo ndani ya ardhi.
Patuli pose pa hako kapi amopa pipu hako pi la wa te pesha rekle diwene tatini weda la aklebe weda hako tamuto wala rido kosim la ya kaka pune we metale.
Where indigenous peoples and local communities govern the land, a third of the planet, ecosystems remain intact.
It's the only conservancy in Masai Mara that is community-driven, community-managed, community-led, where people, wildlife and livestock live together in harmony.
La communauté s'organise pour gérer sa forêt, pour gérer les espèces qui sont dans la forêt, mais aussi pour s'organiser de manière à recevoir l'assistance internationale.
Deciding in a trust that will be owned by the First Nations, the Tuscan and the First Nations. That gives us real independence.
We are the custodian for the future of the health of our planet.
My dream is for Sungai Utik to receive legal recognition and for indigenous people everywhere to be recognized as wisdom keepers and rightful owners of their customary territory for a sustainable future.
para el pueblo indígena hay lleno de vidas, lleno de recursos que nos ha sostenido nuestra vida por miles de años y ha sostenido de dar aire, el agua a todo el mundo que estamos aquí pisando en esa tierra global.
In my short lifetime, we have gone through a world where few people knew about indigenous culture, to one where people are starting to listen deeply to what you have to say. We have so much to be proud of and so much work is still left to do. The earth is speaking. Are you listening?